Hi there, folks. Welcome to Dateline, Louisiana. I'm Jim Brown, your co-host with my longtime friend and co-host Ronna Gray, who's with me here on the screen. Sure glad you're joining us at the first of our podcasts about things that make the Bayou State, that's Louisiana, so interesting. And I might say this, Ronna, before I throw it to you, but if we were in Iowa or we were in Nebraska or Alaska, any state we come up with, there are certainly interesting things there. But some 52 million people a year find their way to travel to Louisiana, vacation here. There's some special attraction that makes this state very unique. And that's why we think this podcast will be interesting to you out there, and hopefully we'll educate you about some things you might find of interest. We'll give you an email address where you can let us hear from you. We'll try to answer your questions and have a lot of fun. So, hey, Ron, I'm excited about this. This is going to be a lot of fun, isn't it?
A lot of fun. You know, you're absolutely right. There's so many things unique about Louisiana. You can't put your finger on one thing. So we're going to talk about it all over the course of this podcast. We're going to get into the things that make people love living here and also the things that make people love visiting here. And that may be the food, that may be the music, that may be our spicy politics, maybe our history, could be our culture, very unique culture. It could be anything. And we're going to explore it all.
Well, we are. And a lot of people tell me, well, what should I see? I'm coming to New Orleans for a 2-day seminar, and I want to be able to really get a sense of Louisiana. Where do I begin? And that's really hard to do because, and is kind of a split up until probably 30 years ago when you thought of Louisiana. Many people did not know Louisiana. They thought of New Orleans. And New Orleans is just a gem, such a special, special place in all of our hearts. Ron and I will talk a lot about New Orleans in the weeks to come. But in the last 30 years, particularly, there's been a wide-ranging tie to other parts of our interesting state. And we'll talk about those. We'll go on to those as we talk in the weeks and months to come about the special Cajun culture that comes out of Southwest Louisiana. All the wonderful music that emanated from the Louisiana Hayride, the Hank Williamses, the Elvis Presleys, the Johnny Cashes, all got their start up in Northwest Louisiana, where the Louisiana Hayride comes from. My neck of the woods, Ronna, Faraday, Louisiana, that's Northeast Louisiana. Jerry Lee Lewis, Mickey Gilley, the Country Singer of the Year, Reverend Jimmy Swaggart, Howard K. Smith, General Claire Chenault. Some of you young folks don't know those names. We'll tell you because they really had a major effect, not just on this country, but in many effects throughout the whole world. So much comes from Louisiana outside of New Orleans, and we'll have a lot of fun touching on that too.
Really, when you say someone says, I'm going to be there for 2 days, and what do I see? Well, you're not even going to see New Orleans in 2 days. You're not even going to, even if you eat 3 meals a day in all the great restaurants there, you're not going to scratch the surface of what you need to see. So we're going to meander through the state like the Mississippi River does, and we're going to take you to places maybe people haven't heard of before. I was reading an article today, Jim, on someone who was born in Jigger, Louisiana. Now, I believe that's up near Winsboro in your neck of the woods.
That's in
That
Franklin
was one
Parish.
I had not heard of.
I was state senator in that area, and Jigger was part of my district. So if you don't know where it is, it's kind of, let's see, kind of by Dry Prong. You might have heard of that name. That's pretty close. Or there's a lot of little towns like that, the Waterproof.
Right.
So a lot of those little, and of course, every state has those same little names, but Frogmore is what was part of my district. It's a very, very famous little name. It had a great plantation home, one of the first cotton gins in Louisiana. And I went up to visit some friends the other day, and the Frogmore gin and the plantation home had burned to the ground, which is something we're really fighting. You know, if you think about history in the old homes, there are magnificent antebellum homes in Georgia, and certainly in Alabama and Mississippi. But one of the highest concentrations are in Louisiana, coming up and down the Mississippi River. You know, that's the lore of so much of the culture and history of this country. And so those homes that are there when they're made obviously of cypress, and they would use moss grass to put the bricks together, very susceptible to fires. And so we've lost a lot of those major plantation to fires. I'm sorry to see that the Frogmore plantation burned to the ground for you folks that are interested. But, and Ron, I just was thinking, well, if someone said, just sum up what to do if I come down there, what do I want to find out about? I'm just throwing out some words to you that come to mind. You know, you got to have beignets. Now, I know those folks in Louisiana know what a beignet is. It's a fried donut, and people stand in line for an hour or so at some of the locations to get a beignet, don't they?
It's not just a fried donut. It's our official state donut. So when you've got
right? No, I didn't
officials,
know that.
yes, it's our official state donut, the beignet.
Well, I didn't know that. So, of course, then beignets. Then we've got king cakes, and everybody in around the event Mardi Gras. We got to talk about Mardi Gras, but gets themselves a king cake. Rhonda, tell our listeners about king cakes.
Well, now there's so many different kinds. It's almost a contest to see who has the best king cake. So New Orleans has places where people line up before daylight and stand in line, because when their king cakes are sold out, they're sold. And so you got to find which kind you like. Then there's a Vietnamese bakery that makes a very interesting king cake. Now we fill them with everything. It's not just enough to have kind of that bready cake pastry with some icing slathered on top. Now you've got to fill it with fruit fillings or chocolate fillings or praline fillings, or now there's so many different kinds. It's amazing on the king cake. But yes, we have an official state donut, and if you come to Louisiana, you certainly have to try the beignet, and if you come during Mardi Gras season, you better have a king cake.
And that's something that if you go to offices at any office building in Louisiana for the 3 weeks or so before Mardi Gras, you'll always find a king cake where the kitchen is. People will take turns. It's my turn or your turn tomorrow to bring the king cake there. And as Rhonda said, usually they're kind of a horizontally round, kind of an oblong round, covered with icing, traditionally on the outside, but now, as you said, Ron, on the inside too. And there's always a baby in the king cake. Somebody knows, what's the baby doing in there? And I guess that's tradition. In some places, if you get the baby, that's good luck. In office parties, if you get the baby, that means you got to
bring
buy
the next king
the next day.
Maybe not such good luck, but
that's right.
When you talk about Mardi Gras, another thing we're going to talk about over the course of our podcast is Louisiana has a parade for everything. So Mardi Gras parades now go on all over the state. It's just exploded all over the South, actually. I don't know if it's grown much beyond the South, but you've got a lot of places in Mississippi, Alabama, and the Gulf Coast that celebrate Mardi Gras now. But we even have funeral parades in Louisiana, and I'm not sure any other state can have that claim.
Well, I think that it comes from tradition tied to the Catholic religion, because Louisiana is primarily Catholic, and particularly in South Louisiana. But the tradition being that you celebrate life, you mourn, of course, initially, but then you celebrate a long life, and you do that with the coincidental music that comes out of this state. Jazz, the birth of jazz was in Louisiana, came from Storyville, the red light district, just to the side of the French Quarter. Louis Armstrong played in those clubs when he first started out, before he became so famous. And so the jazz sense that you see, and then music in the churches, not just in Louisiana, but particularly in the South, a number of churches, there's a rhythm of celebration. And so when you talk about jazz funerals, I'm sure a lot of you have seen, if you see NCIS New Orleans or some of these shows emanating, some of the movies out of New Orleans, you'll see the people that will be carrying the casket, walking in a somber fashion, and all of a sudden the trumpet will blow and the band kicks up and people are dancing in the street. And I think it symbolizes that, look, we've gone from the mourning period. We certainly mourned our loved one who passed away, but there is celebration in life as life goes on, and therefore you see these jazz funerals. And particularly in New Orleans, you'll see a jazz
Yes.
funeral there virtually every day of the week, quite frankly.
And you can't really talk about Mardi Gras without mentioning someone we just lost recently. It was Blaine Kern, kind of Mr. Mardi Gras. And that's a good example of what you're saying. His company made these fantastic Mardi Gras floats, not just in New Orleans, but for people all over the world. He grew it into a huge, huge business. And then he had a place in New Orleans where if you visited, you could go see these floats and all these characters and themes that he created for these Mardi Gras parades. And he passed away recently, and it was just as you said, it was a huge celebration of his life, of a life very well lived, and all the contributions that he made to it.
He had a jazz funeral that emanated from a place called Gallier Hall, the old city hall right on St. Charles Street, one of the main boulevards in New Orleans. And Blaine went off with a blaze of glory. Wonderful guy, great sense of humor. I go back and your listeners may not realize this. I'm way too young to go back this far, but I ran for governor of Louisiana back in 1987. Blaine Kern graciously offered his Mardi Gras Den to host a big campaign rally. And Ronnie, you were there. I think we had over 1,000 people there at that Mardi Gras rally. And they loved all the great ambiance and all the floats that were there. And then remember Clarence Frogman Henry, who had the one song in America. I don't know why I love you, but I do.
But I do.
I know I jumped up on the stage with Blaine, who was there, and we both started singing along with Clarence Frogman. I don't know why I love you, but I do. And
he's great.
Kind of the highlight of my career, actually. So, but you mentioned Blaine, and today they have what is called the Mardi Gras Den, located right on the river, where you can go and see all these marvelous floats and have a great tour and get a history of Mardi Gras. And I guess and we'll have to do a whole Mardi Gras show, Ron, I guess. But,
absolutely.
Arnaud's Restaurant is one of the great classical restaurants in the French Quarter in New Orleans. And they have on the second floor a whole history of Mardi Gras involving all the Mardi Gras costumes, and they lay out the history going back so far, and going back into when Mardi Gras was founded back, it was early 1900s, late 19th century, and the 18th century. And so there's just a lot of history there that the people come to life, and we got to have a whole show just on Mardi Gras. But you mentioned Mardi Gras, and then this whole term Creole that emanates primarily from New Orleans, but Creole cooking and a Creole way of life. And I guess the Creole term comes from the intermarrying or the relationships between slaves or African Americans and white landlords generally, and those offspring were very light-skinned kids. And there is a whole community of Creoles that flow through South Louisiana, and so the Creole
with a lot of French influence in the Creole community as well.
Very much so. And then you get the term the Creole cooking, the Creole French cooking, and there was a special blend where Creoles who were either through slaves who immigrated from the Caribbean, from islands down in Central America, came in from Haiti and other countries, would bring the flavors, their spices, the Caribbean spices that used, and then were tied to local blends of seasoning that went into something as basic as just a fish, something like redfish. Redfish used to be a trash fish, and then we learned how to spice it all up, and now it's looked at as a premier fish all over the world. But those spices is what did it, and it came from the whole focus and the background of Creole cooking.
Well, anytime you have communities that build up around major ports, such as a port of New Orleans or a major river and a river delta, deltas are always melting pots, and deltas always bring together many cultures because people just migrate to live in these rich deltas for lots of different reasons, for the culture, for the agricultural pursuits maybe. So it's no surprise that New Orleans has such French and Spanish and Creole and African influences in the food and the flavors there. But we better move on from New Orleans, or maybe our listeners will think it's going to be all about New Orleans. And you're sitting in front of a bridge in one of my favorite cities, the one where I live, Baton Rouge.
That's in Baton Rouge. It has a marvelous history that goes back. You know, the only battle in the Revolutionary War between the English and the Patriots, the Americans, that did not take place in the original 13 colonies was Baton Rouge, Louisiana. But you didn't know that, did you?
No.
Little tidbit of history, right? And Baton Rouge, the state has a marvelous old state capitol sitting up on the hill. And Baton Rouge, where'd that name come from? Really referred to as Red Stick, an Indian name that named it Baton Rouge originally. And so the whole Red Stick name tied into Baton Rouge. And
if we have listeners from Baton Rouge, they probably know this story, but I love telling how we got the name Red Stick. And it was when the early French settlers came down the Mississippi River. They came across a sort of a tree or a stake in the ground on the levee of the Mississippi. And it had these carcasses, animal carcasses hanging on it. So the blood had stained the stick red. And I'm sure our listeners are thinking, what on earth are you telling us? But this was the way the early Native American tribes marked their hunting grounds. So when you got to the Red Stick, it started another tribe's hunting grounds and they knew to stop. So the early French settlers referred to this place as Red Stick, although I always say it sure sounds a lot better in French when you say Baton Rouge. It sounds a lot better. But the Red Stick was placed on the levee of the Mississippi River, a natural levee that's on a bluff up at the Southern University campus, which is a historically Black university here in Baton Rouge. And it has a natural levee there because the bluff goes very high. So as the settlers came down the river and saw this, they named this area Red Stick. So that's how we got our name.
Did you make that? Is this just a good
made it
story
all
you
up.
made up?
Made it all
up.
No.
And I'm a history buff. I've taught history at both LSU and Tulane in New Orleans. I didn't know that. So
now you learned something today.
That's right. Now I know. Add it to the lore. Add it to the special lore of Baton Rouge. But
and visitors can go right up there to the Southern University campus and see a piece of sculpture that is a red stick on the bluffs there. And when you hear people talk about Southern University on the bluffs, that's where the red stick was. And that's where it is. We also have one in downtown Baton Rouge that you can also see. So we're very proud of how the city got its name.
Well, that's fascinating. And Baton Rouge, of course, is the state capital. It has the highest state capital of any capital in America that goes up, I'm not sure how many feet it goes up, to 34 stories. And Governor Huey Long, our notorious governor down here, built that state capitol starting in 1936 and it's a marvelous capitol with all types of marble and sculpture. Built that capitol in 2 years. Ronna, if you wanted to replicate the Louisiana State Capitol today, you couldn't even get permits in 2 years. You couldn't even do the environmental studies in 2 years. It would take 5 to 10 years just to do the foundation, and it might be a 20-year project. 2 years. It's a marvelous capitol with so much history. Huey Long was shot there in the state capitol. I was honored to have several offices over the years, both as a state senator. When I was Secretary of State, I was there in the state capitol. And Ronna, you were my first assistant in that office. And then when I was insurance commissioner. So I spent a good part of my life in that state capitol. And I could talk to you for a long, long time about the history, the old mints, the surrounding areas that just have so much history there. You're right. Baton Rouge is certainly an exceptional place.
Right. And then if people ask me about what do I want to see if I visit Louisiana, I love to tell them places a little off the beaten track. Like one of my favorite places to go is Lake Martin over by Breaux Bridge, which is this incredible ecosystem of birds and plants. And what about Avery Island? Have you
Or the
seen anything like Avery Island in any other state?
the Tabasco sauce is made out of Avery Island, that is known throughout the world. Everybody's heard of Tabasco sauce. And the bird
Estuary.
estuaries, and of course, the alligator and the nutria. And there's so much great wildlife down through there that ties in to the whole wetlands. It's a whole separate story. And Ron, I know you've been so interested. And we don't want to divert. We're going to come back to a whole story on that. But why are the wetlands by far the highest concentration of wetlands of any place in America? Why are they so important both to Louisiana and to America?
Well, you're right. I could talk about that for a whole show too, and maybe we will, and bring in some other folks to talk on that subject. But we provide the flood relief and stormwater drainage and everything for more than half of the United States, coming right down through our Mississippi River Delta there. And for many years, the river flooded, replenished the delta and replenished the wetlands, and the wetlands were fine and healthy. But the flooding obviously had a tremendous impact on the growth in the cities and the people living along the river. So the Corps of Engineers levied the Mississippi, and as they say, unintended consequences deprived the wetlands of that fresh water that kept them healthy. And we began losing our wetlands at an alarming rate. So listeners might think, okay, so you lose your wetlands. Well, we like to say here the wetlands are a speed bump for hurricanes, because the more healthy wetlands you have out there, when these hurricanes, and we're having increasingly violent storms, come in from the Gulf of Mexico, they slow down dramatically coming across wetlands and barrier islands. And by the time they reach New Orleans or Baton Rouge or other coastal cities, the winds are greatly diminished. Well, as we lose the wetlands, you see things like Hurricane Katrina. And you understand, I think more than anything, that helped the people of the world understand here's a world-class city, so many people visit and love. It was just devastated by a hurricane. Well, why had this not really happened? Variety of reasons, but not having those wetlands was a big part of it. And we've willingly hosted oil and gas drilling in our wetlands, but carving them up with canals and things like that have taken a toll on them. But they feed the world. I mean, the seafood. People come here for seafood, but our seafood is shipped everywhere. Louisiana seafood's a staple. So there's just so many things. Migratory birds land in these wetlands, and as they're migrating across the Gulf from South America or going to South America. So we lose those. We start to lose whole species if we don't have healthy wetlands. So as you can see, I could spend a whole
And we might,
podcast talking about that, but they're so important, and I hope we can continue to raise awareness about them.
And you make that point that not only are they important to us living in Louisiana, but important to everyone all over the country because of the produce that comes out of these wetlands. And so you make
oil and gas, that people want, a tremendous amount of that comes from Louisiana waters. So like I said, we willingly host this production for years, but we can't let it destroy our coastline.
Well, moving on with so much to talk about, we've talked about food, and we'll talk at length about music and about the various genres that came out of Louisiana. A lot of famous people came out of the Bayou State. We could go a long, long list. I don't know if we'll have an NFL football season this year, but the royalty of the NFL is the Manning family that comes out of New Orleans. Peyton Manning, Eli Manning, the two great quarterbacks, and of course their dad, Archie Manning, an all-NFL pro quarterback that quarterbacked the New Orleans Saints, is one particular family. And Ron, I'm sure you've got some names. I mentioned, Ellen DeGeneres, who's got a huge popular TV show, comes out of Louisiana. We've got Lil Wayne, the rapper, who's
right?
one of the most popular rappers throughout the country. Tim McGraw is up in my part of the country, up in Delhi, Louisiana. His dad was a great baseball player, and Tim came from up in Northeast Louisiana. Harry Connick Jr.
Oh, yeah.
his dad for years as the district attorney. And I know when Harry Connick Sr. was sworn in for the first time as district attorney, his 5-year-old son, Harry Connick Jr., sat down at the piano to play the Star Spangled Banner. And I was there, I witnessed that. And so, and now look what Harry Connick Jr. is today in terms of such a superstar. Chime in if you got some names. Richard Simmons.
Of course, Britney Spears.
That's right. Of course,
Britney
up in
Spears
Kentwood,
from
Louisiana.
Kentwood,
She's up-
Louisiana, right?
That's right. Very famous, and her family is still here, and she takes a lot of pride in her home state in Louisiana. I didn't know this. Reese Witherspoon is from Louisiana, born in New Orleans. I didn't know that. One of my favorite actresses. And did
I
you
think,
know she was?
yeah, I had seen that somewhere. It took me by surprise too, because she's so well identified with Tennessee, but she was born in New Orleans, as a lot of people were. So, yeah, we can claim her too. That's
No
another
doubt.
talent.
I mentioned Louis Armstrong. We could go through so many great
Al
musicians.
Hurt
Oh,
for the older listeners.
That's right. And such
Pete Fountain and Al Hurt, certainly.
So many great musicians, the Neville brothers, and so many of the great traditional families that had such musical backgrounds that came along, like I say, that came out of Louisiana, that were born here. At a very low point, Lee Harvey Oswald was born in Louisiana. And, you know,
That's
there's still
amazing.
conspiracy theories about the Kennedy assassination, and Oswald, what motivated him to leave New Orleans. He was very active as a protester in the streets of New Orleans. But about a month later, he heads over to Dallas. What motivated him to do that? And was there a conspiracy? There still is a Kennedy annual center about the Kennedy Assassination Center that takes place in New Orleans every year. People from all over the world come to discuss what really happened. Was there someone behind the grassy knoll? And of course, we'll never know. But that was one of the low points, obviously, in this country's history. And he did come from Louisiana. Of course, from my hometown, I'm from a little town called Faraday, Louisiana.
You've got
folks,
lots of famous names, right?
Well, never heard of that. It's across the river from Natchez, Mississippi, and just northeast Louisiana. Jerry Lee Lewis, the great rocker, who's still alive and kicking today at 84. Mickey Gilley, who still has a show place up in Branson, Missouri. He was the country singer of the year. Reverend Jimmy Swaggart. Howard K. Smith was from Faraday, the great newscaster on ABC for many, many years. General Claire Chennault, you history buffs, the Fighting Tiger fame in World War II, was a Faradayite. And so I could go on and on with you, but we've got a lot of famous folks. Try to get some on the show since it's about Louisiana, Rana.
And you just taught me something. I was not aware that you all called yourselves Faradayites.
Faraday. Well,
that's a
right.
new one. That's a new one. And I'm going to ask you, did you just make that up?
Yeah, I probably did. Faradayites, right. I'll tell you, though, it's interesting. You know, Louisiana was named after King Louis the 14th. Now, it wasn't King Louise, it was King Louis. So the proper name is not Louisiana, it's Louisiana. It's Louis, it's Louisiana. And that's how it's said in all the rural parts of the state. But as people get it, particularly in New Orleans and other locations, and outsiders talk about Louisiana, but it's really not. It wasn't. There was no Queen Louise. There was King Louis, Louisiana. So got to get those pronunciations down. Just
now
right.
We know how. We want to say it like the Faradayites say it. That's for sure.
That's right. That's right.
Then you get into chefs and think about people like Paul Prudem, who really set off a cooking craze with blackened seafood and other items that has just took over the whole country. You can go to Idaho and they're going to have something blackened probably.
And if you like, you want to know a little of food history, if you go to my website, well, actually go on our website, which is DatelineLouisiana.com. That's DatelineLouisiana.com. My website's JimBrownLA.com. I wrote a column last week about Paul Prudem. His last restaurant, K. Paul's, closed down in New Orleans. And I wrote kind of a little memorial about knowing Paul, how we used to do a radio show together. And he was really a character, Rana. Paul weighed 300 pounds, died at 75, way too young, but he didn't cut back on the food. That's one of the causing the problems.
And he wasn't very tall. He was not a very tall to carry that weight.
And I asked him one time, I said, Chef, the sauces you put on your fish and it just has such a marvelous taste with it. What's your secret? Why is the taste so exquisite? He said, well, Jim, you know how most people would use 97.6 butter fat. I use 99.8 butter fat. That's why my so that was, and then he told me a great story that I've used on a number of occasions, speeches and everything, Rana, about Chef Prudem. He said he stopped off at a little store in South Louisiana. He was from Opelousas, Louisiana, one of 13 children, and so he was there and stopped to get some cold beverage when he was growing up and around Opelousas. That's in St. Landry Parish, north of Baton Rouge, about an hour. So he says he walks up on this porch and this fellow's cooking up there something, smells real good. And he says, what you cooking there, friend? And the fellow says, I'm cooking me up a gumbo. And in gumbo in Louisiana, we throw anything in a pot and call it a gumbo. He said, what kind of gumbo is it? And the fellow told Paul, well, that's a hot gumbo. And Paul looked at him and says, a hot gumbo? What's a hot gumbo taste like? And the fellow says, oh, about like an owl gumbo. And Paul would burst out laughing when he'd tell that story to me. So,
well, I think this is legend too, or maybe I'm making it up as we go along. But I believe also Paul Prudem is given credit for creating the turducken. And when you speak of excesses, what could be more of one than a chicken stuffed inside a duck stuffed inside a turkey? So you get you get three meats in one for your Thanksgiving dinner.
All with stuffing and
sure, and with stuffing, right? Not just the bird stuff, but stuffing too.
And remember, Rosie O'Donnell had a national show on. She was on every day for years and years. And she invited my wife and my wife's twin sister had a restaurant. And they had turducken in the restaurant. And so Rosie O'Donnell invited them up to cook a turducken on her TV show, on the national TV show. So my wife Gladys went up and they cooked up a big turducken, and Rosie said, never tasted anything like this before. So it was a real treat.
They're very, very, very popular here for Thanksgiving. And I think that's one of Paul Prudem's inventions there too. So he gets a lot of credit.
No doubt about it. So
if you were telling people places to see in the northern part of the state, we'll have to do a whole show at some point too on Poverty Point, which is one of the World Heritage Sites, has been named one of those, and just an amazing archaeological site in Louisiana that attracts people all over the world who travel to those. It's in a very remote area. One I've been, but I bet you're more familiar with it than I am.
It is a marvelous Indian mound is what it is, created thousands of years ago, and one of the major archaeological discoveries in the country. People make pilgrimages there to study why it came about in the first place, the background of the Indian cultures from there. And you're right, it's up in the very far corner of Northeast Louisiana. So, Ronna, I guess the bottom line is we're going to have a lot to talk about on Dateline Louisiana. Hope you'll go to our website at datelinelouisiana.com that we're just putting up this week to get more information. And guys, Ronna, we could talk for hours and hours, but I think we've whetted people's appetites. We've kind of given you a taste of why it's such a special place to live. Some people say it's made up of all kinds of outlandish people and activities. It is completely off the wall. It is a whole state of contradictions. But those of us who live here say, but we never want to live anyplace else. So with that, maybe we got to wind down and leave a taste for people to come back again and get a future podcast right here on Dateline Louisiana.
Sure, and we invite them to subscribe to Dateline Louisiana wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow Jim and me on Twitter. I'm at Ronna Gray on Twitter, and Jim, you're at Jim Brown.
Jim Brown LA on Twitter.
LA, right.
LA for Louisiana. Jim Brown LA on Twitter. And well, I'll tell you, we'll have up in about a week, we'll have up a sign-in box on our website at datelinelouisiana.com. You'll be able to put in your email address, and we'll send you notices of future podcasts coming up. So we're getting all that up here now, and we'll keep you posted here coming up in the weeks and months to come.
Lots of stories to come, so we hope you'll listen.
Well, a lot of fun having you there listening to us today on our first podcast, Dateline Louisiana. For Ronna Gray and Jim Brown, take care. We'll talk to you again soon.